All right, welcome to another movie review stream. My name is Mark McPherson, film critic for movieswithmark.com, TwinCitiesGeek.com, and FilmInquiry.com. So we're already in November. We are right in the middle of award season here, so we've got to get to a few movies that we got to cover. There's way more coming in the next few weeks, but I thought I'd get a head start and get to covering a few big ones. So obviously we're going to be covering the big one coming out this weekend, The Marvels, the latest film from the Marvel Cinematic Universe. We'll also be covering a film coming up this December, the new film by Yorgos Lanthimos called Poor Things, starring Emma Stone and Willem Dafoe and Mark Ruffalo, and we'll get into all that. And I'll also be reviewing one of the films that popped up on streaming this week, Quiz Lady, starring Awkwafina and Sandra Oh, which is currently playing on Hulu. So we'll get to covering all those films today, but if you like early reviews, particularly since Poor Things won't be out for about a month in most areas, I think it might expand a little bit before then, but well, it's going to expand further in December, of course. That's when all the big films will expand. But if you like early reviews like that, be sure to like and subscribe, and just stay on board for this channel, because we'll get you all the latest movie reviews, like including Captain Marvel, which is coming out in theaters tomorrow. Technically today, if you're already going to Thursday previews. So we'll get to covering all that. But I just have to clean my glasses here for a moment. While I do that, I should mention some of the other stuff I've been working on. If you go over to like TwinCitiesGeek.com right now, I actually have an interview over there with Paul Rugg, who did the voice of Freakazoid, as well as some voices on Animaniacs, and was also one of the writers on that. Very fun guy to talk to. I've kind of, I don't know why, I wanted to... I've got interview opportunities before, and all I want to do is talk to cartoon voice actors, just because they're so nice. They're the nicest people I've ever interviewed. Like Phil LaMarr, I loved geeking out with. Rob Paulson was just fun to just hear him dole out all those voices, and Paul Rugg was about as fun as I'd expect. I followed him on social media and stuff, so he's about what I expected. Okay, so let me get my notes up here, and we will get to our first review. Obviously, we'll cover the big one that everyone's going to be talking about this weekend, The Marvels. Sequel to Captain Marvel. All right, let me get a drink of water here. Alrighty. And here we go. In 3, 2, 1. So, The Marvels is the sequel to 2019's Captain Marvel. Although it's a sequel to a lot of stuff. Like, this is probably one of the first films, I would say, within the Marvel Cinematic Universe where it feels like you have to do your homework here. Like, before with the Marvel Cinematic Universe, it used to be just, if you pay attention to the comics and if you pay attention to all the different TV shows, there'd be little bonuses and Easter eggs in there for you. So they weren't required to understand the films, but they were, they were like a little extra something. Like if you watched Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., there was a little something for you in there while you were watching, like Thor: The Dark World and Captain America: Civil War. You were rewarded a little bit like that. You weren't required to. You could still enjoy those films without watching that show, but yeah, that's the way it went. Unfortunately, it's kind of it's getting to a point now that we have all these like Marvel TV shows that are populating Disney Plus now, it feels like you need to do homework just to understand what's going on in the Marvels. And keep in mind, that's just to understand what is happening within this film. Not to like appreciate the Easter eggs, not to appreciate the plot, but you really do have to be boned up on not just like Captain Marvel and Avengers Endgame, but also Miss Marvel and WandaVision and more or less Secret Invasion. Like, not a lot even happened in Secret Invasion, but if you want to figure out what's going on with Nick Fury, you're probably going to have to watch that as well, because this is a film that hits the ground running hard. Like, if you watched Miss Marvel, like, that ended on like a big cliffhanger when Kamala Khan with her magical bracelet just got flung into her closet and just, switched places with Captain Marvel, and it's like, oh, what's going on here? And the film picks up immediately from where that left off. So if you haven't been keeping up with Miss Marvel, you do not get an introduction to that. Similarly, if you haven't been keeping up with WandaVision, you are given no introduction for Monica Rambeau. She's immediately working with Saber, and if you did not watch Spider-Man Far From Home and you haven't been catching up with what Nick Fury's been doing, you will not get an introduction to Saber either. It's just like, they're all here and they expect you to be caught up with all of it. But even on that level, because I have watched all the Marvel Cinematic Universe movies and I have watched all the shows, but even on that level, it's just chaotic. That first act is just, it's just it hits the ground running hard. It doesn't spend any time introducing the characters, getting you used to them. It's, if you've only watched the movies, it's been a while since we've seen Carol Danvers, since the first Captain Marvel film and Avengers Endgame. You've seen little glimpses of her and Miss Marvel and stuff like that, but you want to get you want to get used to Brie Larson being back into this role, because there is a lot more for her to do in this film. So you'd like to get to just get a little bit more acquainted with her. You don't get that time. You don't even get that time to appreciate Iman. Well, actually, now that I think about it more, Kamala Khan playing, who's Miss Marvel, played by Iman Vellani, who does a great job. She does exactly what you'd expect her to do in this film, which is that she's supposed to be the enthusiastic fangirl. She can't wait to work with her hero, Captain Marvel, and it's so exciting, and she gets to go on a space adventure, and she has all this enthusiasm, and I love her on that degree, but it's you don't get time to get used to her all that much. You get a little bit of introduction about, what her drive is, how she idolizes Captain Marvel, and how she uses her powers more or less. You get a brief introduction. You get more of that than you do with Monica Rambeau, played by Teyonah Parris, who only kind of briefly mentions that she got her powers from WandaVision, and you just have to keep up. And you have to keep up fast, because the big development they show here is that all three of these superheroes have their powers merging, where they're switching places with each other, and they've got to figure it out while there's another Kree attack going on the Earth at the same time. And it's an attack that you're not really informed all that much about. You're giving a brief glimpse of how this is starting, but you don't have the whole story. And that would be, it would be fine if you could, if you could gel with the chemistry and kind of go with the flow and kind of be more intrigued to see where this goes. But just with how the first act is messy with all its technobabble, and it's chaotically edited, where you really have to be paying close attention just to appreciate the fight scenes, because the fight scenes where the three superheroes are all using their powers and they're all switching between different locations where they are, it's a neat idea in theory, but like I said, the way it's edited, it's just so all over the place that it's hard to keep up with what is going on here. That it launches you straight into the deep end. Like, if you haven't been caught up on all of Marvel at this point, there's no introduction here. There's no slowing down to get everyone used to it, get you back into the flow, just kind of, get used to Captain Marvel again. You're flung right into it immediately. And it wouldn't bother me so much if there was something more intriguing to this story. Unfortunately, it's just kind of a really standard superhero plot of trying to save Earth and save other planets from being obliterated by another villain who is more or less just kind of replicating the same kind of drive and even the same weaponry as Ronan the Accuser, from Guardians of the Galaxy and for his brief appearance of trying to assault Earth in Captain Marvel. So the villain you have this time is Dar-Benn, played by Zawe Ashton, and she is not given much time to appreciate her as a villain. She has the drive, she has the motivation, she has a reason to want to attack Captain Marvel and obliterate all these planets, but we don't get to spend that much time with her. And this is the biggest problem as with the film as a whole, is that it's roughly 100 minutes, which is really, 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 really tight for a Marvel film. Usually I expect on the low end of Marvel films to be 2 hours, and this one is under 2 hours. which would be fine. I would be cool with that, especially since like this is a fairly standard superhero plot that I don't think so much it would hinder a film like this if there was some breathing room. You know, like, I mean, the plot's fairly standard. It's not all that interesting. They have to stop another villain from blowing up the galaxy. So it would be fine if they had lots of detours to, you know, just have more chemistry between Carol and Monica and Kamala. And just visiting other planets and having sci-fi hijinks and some cool fights. The way, if they had room to build that up, that could actually make for a really fun film. And to the Marvel's credit, there are some interesting asides where the film actually does start to find a little bit of its groove and actually become fun. Like at one point in their investigation, they have to visit a planet where everyone speaks in musical numbers. And it's run by this prince played by Park Seo-joon. And it's just like the way that he switches between musical numbers and speaking normally is just it's silly, but it's also like charming and it's kind of fun, and for no reason at all, like characters will just like pop up in like, you know, decadent royalty dresses and stuff like that, just royal gowns, and it's like, and it's bizarre, and the characters recognize that it's silly and weird, but they go with it. And at that point, I was kind of getting invested. I'm like, oh, okay, this is kind of fun. I'm kind of digging where this is going here. Unfortunately, it lasts for, you know, like for a very brief window of time, and then it goes back to the plot about, you know, they got to stop Dar-Benn again from, you know, obliterating this planet and conquering the galaxy. It's like, okay, it's the standard plot again. But then there'd actually be some decent chemistry. Like, I like the way how Monica is kind of having some issues with being separated from Carol for so long. Like within the first Captain Marvel film, she was a child, so having been absent for so long, there's this sense of like, you know, I needed you here, or, you know, like I wanted a sense of family and you weren't there. And also, like, there's a whole angle with Carol trying to come to terms with what she was doing out in the galaxy and how she has regrets about kind of sort of instigating like civil war between planets. And then you like another aspect that I thought they would explore, but they don't as much, is, you know, Kamala Khan realizing, you know, what it means to be a superhero and being just not a lot, but just a little bit disillusioned, where like her fangirling would kind of, you know, take a little bit of a backseat, and she'd have to like grow a little bit more as a character, which is unfortunate because most of them she's fangirling through the whole thing, which, you know, for the first half of the film, I thought it was fine. It was cute. It was adorable. I liked the way that she, you know, has that kind of audience surrogate angle to her, that, you know, she reacts the way anyone else would react to, you know, like evil aliens and planets blowing up and, you know, alien cats with tentacles. She has those great reactions. But a little bit of her, I think, goes a long way. And by the second act, I was kind of hoping that there would be a little bit more developed with her. And it feels like the film was leaning towards that, to kind of like have that moment where she, you know, gets to speak with Carol, to kind of realize that she's not quite the, you know, like the perfect hero that she imagined in her mind. But it gets sidelined a bit. And like Kamala's fangirling remains like kind of like untainted throughout this. Like, she starts the film loving Captain Marvel and she ends it loving Captain Marvel on pretty much the same level. So at least in terms of being like a bit of a cheerleader for this and giving some enthusiasm to the story, which it could really use it, because it, you know, it could get bogged down a bit too much in pathos and treating the sci-fi action a little bit too seriously. She is like the perfect ingredient for this. The problem is, like, this is a crowded film. There's so much going on, and it's so hard to get into the flow of things and get used to the chemistry and appreciate the weirdness, because there's too much going on. There's too many characters. Like, I haven't even talked about like Nick Fury, who, you know, is present and he helps out. But we don't get as many scenes with him and Carol, which is kind of sad, because in the first Captain Marvel film, I kind of liked the chemistry between Brie Larson and Samuel L. Jackson. Like, it felt like it was kind of building, and I was kind of looking to see where it would go after that. But they rarely spend any time together. In fact, most of the film is Nick Fury spending time with Kamala Khan's family, who for some reason just come up to Saber just so I guess they can be protected in case, like, you know, any other supervillains come after Kamala's family for whatever reason, which I get, but they keep showing up, and I get the feeling like they were meant to be like comic relief. But, and the thing is, that could work, but there are too many other characters. Like, even up on the Saber space station where they stay for most of the film, there's already 2 other characters we're introduced to up there that more or less kind of act as better comic relief. So between that, and not to mention like the other, like, you know, I won't spoil it here, but like the other cameos that are thrown into this, it's just, you know, at 105 minutes, there is way too much going on that the scenes that are meant to be, like, you know, fun and have chemistry are just kind of like fall flat. And the few moments that are weird and bizarre and kind of fun, like I mentioned, the musical planet, and there's another subplot involving Goose, the alien cat that can like eat people whole with her tentacles. I like what they do with the cat. There's a very funny sequence that they use with her, in terms of how they like have to save people with the cat. But it, like I said, it's the same with Musical Planet. It ends before it can have a lot of fun with that material. And just when you're starting to get used to it, just when I'm starting to have fun with the film and I'm starting to like, okay, they're finding their groove here, this is working, it would go back to the plot about, you know, they got to save the galaxy, and here's this bland villain, and she has her standard motivations, and she's such a forgettable villain too. Like I get her plight, but we spend so little time with her, and she has so, at least from the few scenes that she has so little personality that it's so hard to feel for this character. Like, on paper, she has solid motivations, but like, you know, she's got, like I said, like it's too, the film is too tight and too crowded that like by the final act you're just kind of like, oh, she's kind of gone and kind of like a forgettable element at this point. Not to mention like the ultimate resolve with the film just kind of like falls back on like standard superhero tropes that by the third act of the film, like it pretty much just goes on autopilot for what you would expect for like this type of superhero story, for the way that it would unfold. Not to mention like the whole thing with the Skrulls being thrown into this, and there's a relation to the Thor films, and just little bits of like Secret Invasion here and there, and it's just, even if you've watched all of it, it's just, it's all tossed together and it doesn't gel well. In fact, there are a lot of moments of character chemistry here that just fall flat, and it's sad to see that, you know, because like all the elements are there. I almost feel like if this film were like 30 or 40 minutes longer and had some of those smaller moments, or had more of those weirder moments with like with the Musical Planet and the alien cats, it could find a good groove. Because I like the way that like that Captain Marvel, the first film, unfolded. Because it left enough room for like the chemistry between Carol and Nick Fury, to kind of get them to bond as characters. Here, there's too many characters that it's hard for them for you to feel that chemistry and that energy, that would make them be lovable and want you to see what they do next year. With the exception of, you know, Kamala Khan, because she's having fun. She's trying to have fun with this as much as she can, and I think for that small goal of her character, she works. But in terms of like Monica coming to terms with her grief, and Carol coming to terms with, you know, using her powers for good, those arcs kind of fall flat compared to everything else, especially compared to what Kamala Khan is doing in the film. So it's really depressing, because like there are moments that I genuinely enjoyed here. I enjoyed the little asides when they were venturing off to other planets and finding goofy stuff to do with all these weird sci-fi elements, because you want that out of this weird material. It's almost to like a level where, you know, you look how like the Marvel TV series have unfolded. I wish that this were a TV series, just because there'd be enough room that you could expand on the characters. That there'd be, I mean, like even at 6 episodes, there'd be way more room to explore the characters. You could have a lot more time to have all these fun asides, and it would just work so much better. But as this tight 105-minute film, it just comes off with just standard tropes and just energy that doesn't work as well as it should, which is really disappointing, because like there are moments that I genuinely loved, but all things considered, The Marvels is a bit of a mess, and a mess that requires you to do homework just to understand what's going on. Not to appreciate it, just to understand. So yeah, I wish I could love The Marvels more, because it has some good elements, it has some great ideas, and it has a great cast. But it's in such a rush to cover so much of this material and just build up to the next Marvel film that it just comes off. It's such a lacking film, especially for one from the Marvel Cinematic Universe, which usually finds a decent groove and finds something more to explore in the material. And here, it just feels like a substandard superhero film. So The Marvels, currently playing in theaters this weekend. You can go check it out at your convenience. I was going to say peril, but it's like I genuinely enjoyed parts of the film. Like, it's not a good Marvel film. But like, if I will say this, if you genuinely loved Captain Marvel and you want to see more of these characters, and see a little bit of like their good back and forth, there's some of that in there. It's just not enough. That's the problem. Is that you have great characters, you have good chemistry, you have great ideas, and they don't gel well. And I get the feeling that that's part of like one part running time and one part, trying to make sure the Marvel Cinematic Universe is all linked up. So yeah, unfortunate. Okay, so let's get to a better film. A much better film. Okay, let me get my notes up here. A little bit of a drink. And we will talk about Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things. All right, so here we go. In 3, 2, 1. So, Poor Things is the new... I knew I could... Poor Things and Yorgos Lanthimos. I knew I was going to have that roll off the tongue there. Let me just get it. It's just... There are certain words that, like, you get... Like, I'm more used to, like, writing my reviews than I am, like, talking about them. So, like, saying it out loud is a little bit, tongue twister sometimes. Okay, take 2. All right, in 3, 2, 1. So, Poor Things is the new film by Yorgos Lanthimos, and it is simultaneously the funniest and horniest movie that I've seen this year. So, like, when I originally saw the trailers for this, I got the impression it's based on a book, which I sadly have not read, but I kind of want to read it after watching the film. But the way that the film is staged, it seems like it's basically, what if Frankenstein's monster was a woman, and it was all about her just discovering sex and all the weird stuff that goes on in the world. And at least that's the idea I got in my head, and the way that it unfolds is pretty much kind of like what I expected for this type of premise, but at the same time, it also goes into weird and wild places and finds just the pitch perfect, darkly comedic moments of absurdity for this weird film, which I know, it's a Yorgos Lanthimos film. He's done stuff like The Favorite and The Lobster. So if you've seen those films, you're used to kind of a little bit of his weirdness, but I dare say that this is probably my favorite Yorgos Lanthimos film, just for how much it engaged me so much throughout. So if you haven't, so basically the premise of this film is that Emma Stone plays Bella, who is a woman that has been rescued by Dr. Godwin Baxter, played by Willem Dafoe. And Godwin has basically saved this woman from death. So I don't know how much of a spoiler this will be, just because, like, I mean, there's a lot of shocking stuff that goes on in the film, so, hopefully this won't be a big spoiler. But what he's discovered is that he found this dead body of this woman and that she was pregnant, and he decided that, well, her brain is too damaged, so I'm going to take the brain of her child and put it in her head. So Bella is basically, it's a child's brain in a grown woman's body. So what Godwin decides to do, Godwin is this guy who's, he's been used to being, dissected. Like he has a horrible history with his father who did all this experimentation on his body, and Godwin has just kind of like continued that legacy of, exploring, what it is to, cut open the human body and experiment with it. And all his experiments are littered throughout his house. Like he's got dogs with like the heads of ducks. He's got chickens with the heads of dogs. Just weird stuff. He's got cadavers and open bodies and brains in jars and all this like weird mad scientist stuff. So Godwin is trying to do a little bit more experimentation with Bella and wants to kind of like broaden her horizons. Like when we're first introduced to Bella, she can barely form words or talk. She kind of like struggles to walk around and form sentences, and she pees all over the floor, and she's just coming to understand stuff about the world and her body. So Godwin hires Max, played by Ramy Youssef. I believe I'm pronouncing that correctly. So Godwin is basically studying up on what Bella is doing with herself and understanding the world and how she forms words. And then just one day she discovers masturbation, and she likes it a lot. And then she starts like, showing it off to other people, and other people are like, oh, that's not acceptable in society. So she's kind of like slowly learning, what it is to, be in touch with her body and understanding how society interprets sexuality. Now, this ramps up even further when she meets Duncan, played by Mark Ruffalo, who has basically kind of like wooed her into saying like, hey, your father, Godwin, wants to keep you locked up here. Why don't you come travel the world with me? I'll show you all kinds of cool stuff. I'll take you on vacations and on trips. We'll have wild sex throughout it. And of course, like, Bella's like, oh, of course, I want to get out of the house and, just sweeten the deal. So they go off on this bizarre journey. Like, and when I say bizarre, like everything in the film is shot in this very weird way. Like most of the time there's like this fisheye lens where everything feels weird and distorted. There's this very like off-key soundtrack where even when things are trying to seem like beautiful and sweet, they're always like, off-key and seems like a little bit weird, which is like the perfect setting, like the perfect tone to set for this type of setting, especially when you look at like all like the picturesque backgrounds and like the exaggerated style. Not to mention like all the costumes that Bella wears. Like everything that Bella wears has like huge, like big puffy shoulders on her dress, which is just wonderful little touches. And I love how the film is pretty much just Bella's odyssey. Like she goes from just barely being able to form words to barely being able to form words. She goes from all that to, discovering sexuality, to understanding, how stuffy society is, to, to being in touch with vices, to understanding philosophy and capitalism and social structures, to just become a more intelligent woman. And the more that she becomes intelligent on this journey, the more that she angers someone like Duncan. Like Duncan just saw her as this naive woman who just wanted to hang around him and have sex, and she'd be so easily impressed. But the more intelligent she gets and the more like observant she becomes of the world, the more she realizes that Duncan is just not right for her. And she kind of just more or less lets him down in a way where it's like she realizes this isn't going to work out. She's like, I want to see the world. I want to help people. I want to, explore more of my sexuality. I want to do more stuff with life. And, if you don't want to join me on that, then I guess that's your problem. So you basically get to watch Mark Ruffalo go from this like suave guy who kind of like thinks he understands the entire world and knows how to manipulate women and kind of favors himself as a bit of a playboy, to just descending into just this madness of, you know, like this woman who's trying to make sense of the world and just like easily angering this doofus who deserves to be sended up. And it's just beautiful to like watch him like crumble and just go, you know, go become like a mess by the end of the film. And I love how like there's also this building mystery about who Bella was before, you know, Godwin found her, and that kind of comes around by the end of the film for like a bit of an odd twist where she kind of like, you know, she more or less wants to find like the closure of who she was, but at the same time, you know, she also wants to assert herself, you know, against someone who would rather, you know, keep her locked up within like, you know, her strict role within society than explore, you know, anything else that the world has to offer. And the way that kind of Bella just kind of, you know, proceeds through this story with just realizing that, oh, you know, this isn't to the best of my benefit. And she just kind of like states, you know, the problems of the world in this very matter-of-fact manner that she approaches everything, to where like, you know, if I look at it just the right angle, you know, you could see like a little bit of like I could apply like a little bit of like autism film theory to the way how she approaches everything in life practically and understands the world even more than some people seem to think they do. I was almost kind of reminded of the film Being There, in which it's kind of like the joke that like everyone is kind of like misinterpreting this person. They look down on this person as kind of like a child, but ultimately they learn a little bit more about the world and they become much more not only cognizant of how the world operates, but able to find more of their own happiness within that world, which is so fascinating and so like sublime with how it unfolds in this film that you're really rooting for Bella and just like her adventure in general, which takes her on like cruises where she meets deeply philosophical people that she talks openly with sex about, to venturing to poor places where she gives money away, to venturing to brothels where she understands the mechanics of sex and how like she can discover more of herself through there and meet more interesting people through there, and kind of become more understanding of the world. Like I love how like Bella you know, only recognizes like Duncan as almost kind of like the pinnacle of sex just because she's like, it's the one guy she's had sex with the most. But then when she realizes that, you know, other people are not as good at sex and they're not as, you know, they don't have the same stamina. She's kind of like, oh, okay, you know, sex isn't that much of a big deal. You know, it's just like this thing that entices people. And it doesn't always feel good, but I understand how it works, and I understand how it works within society, that I can maybe manipulate it and, you know, kind of assert myself a little bit more in my practice. Which is just like, I love the way that it unfolds in a manner that's both like, that feels both like astute and absurd for how the world operates. Because like, I guess like I have to preference this by saying that this is not going to be a film for everyone. And by that, I mean like it goes to like the most absurd areas of comedy. Like, cause like when I said it's the funniest and the horniest film this year, I mean that simultaneously. There are scenes where it will just smash cut to like wild sex acts and then just, you know, silly sex acts, and it's all treated with like a level of eroticism but also a level of just weirdness and like dark humor throughout that, like, you know, you can't help but laugh at it. But like outside of that, there's just like some genuine moments of just like funny dialogue. Just like Bella's a treasure trove of just hilarious bits. There are so many quotable lines from her. Like at one point, She speaks openly about sexual euphemisms while dining at a hotel with these upper class people, and it just offends everyone at the table. And she cuts it off by hearing a crying baby in the distance, like, "Excuse me, I gotta go punch a baby." And it's just the way that she just kind of like casually goes through recognizing the things that don't work in life and the things that bother her and the things that she wants to do for happiness is just so hilarious. And outside of that, just visually, there's just like gross out and hilarious gags, like especially really early on within Godwin's laboratory, where he's got like naked bodies open, like in which like Bella's like playing with the penis of one of them, and she's like stabbing them, and just like the way that the characters are assembled are weird too. Like Godwin, is very open about, how like he was experimented on and how his body is a lot different from other people. And he brings up how at one point, how he can't quite process food. So he requires like, a special machine that essentially creates like giant burp bubbles that kind of like vomit out of his mouth. So when I say this film is funny, I mean this film is funny from all angles. Like, it's funny on like the sexual level, on like the darkly comedic angle of its observant ways of the world. It's funny on a gross out level with like, like the nudity on display and like the way that bodies are like violated and just like vomit and have like all this disgusting, blood and guts on the screen, the weird experimentation. And yet, because it's Yorgos Lanthimos, it's always treated with like a sense of earnest, where even though it's like weird and dark, there is like a heart to it. Like there is a point to it. It's not just like weird for the sake of weird. There actually is a point to Bella's journey, and you do feel something for her by the end. That like by the time it gets to like the final scene, there's a very crowd pleasing moment where it pretty much almost turns like into a revenge thriller by the end of the film, and it's weirdly satisfying. In fact, from what I understand, like I talked to someone else who had actually read the book, and from what I understand, the book kind of like has this weird twist where it kind of like tries to frame itself like as a much different, as like a much different storyteller who's behind it. Which I think, I don't know, like the way that I heard it, I felt like it could have worked. But in terms of how this film ends, it does end on a very crowd-pleasing moment, but also still weird. Like, it maintains that weirdness throughout the film, and it doesn't let up. Like, I kind of felt like it was getting a little bit kind of like resting on its laurels by the third act, but then there would always be like another weird twist that would come up and something more bizarre that would happen, and it would just get it would just get weirder and crazier from there, and I wouldn't have it any other way. This is, and I'm not kidding when I say this is funny. I was genuinely laughing out loud so hard at this film. Like there's even moments just where even moments where like there's supposed to be like a pause and a beat in there, and they just like kind of hold on that. And it becomes funnier, like the more like they're holding back, trying to like figure out where the scene should end, and just like watching like the frustration build on their faces throughout, and just like the performances all around, like Mark Ruffalo, who just goes from being like I said, going from like a suave playboy to just being this guy who just like cracks raspberries, who just descends into madness. It's just so bizarre. Everyone in this film is just fantastic. I love Emma Stone's performance. I love her development as a character. Willem Dafoe kind of like he feels like he's built for this role, like where he's supposed to be kind of like weird and deformed, but also has a lot of heart to him. But he also speaks in the same like matter-of-fact manner as Emma Stone. And Mark Ruffalo just eating up his scenes alive and just having fun with this material. It's such a bizarre film, but it's also very beautiful. I said that like it's shot with like the kind of like fisheye lens, but it also takes liberties of having a lot of the first act be shot in black and white, and then when you actually get to color, it's very like lavish, and there's these very like decadent backgrounds of like the ocean and these these very like elaborate sets that look like they're straight out of a painting. And even just like the way that they have like this kind of like circular blur to when like, you know, like the characters look like they're in focus in the foreground, but when you look in the background, there's this kind of like radio blur going on, which kind of encapsulates the characters. I just love the way that the film is shot. Like it's beautiful to look at. Like even if you're somebody who's just like grossed out by everything, you can still look at this film and say, oh yeah, that's beautiful. I love that shot. Just but I mean, like, if you're willing to go along for the ride, and if you're willing to see like Yorgos Lanthimos at like maximum levels of surreality and sex and violence and just like heavy duty societal commentary, this film is a lot of fun. I loved how daring it was. I loved how bold it was with how much sex there is in it. I love how just like uproarious the dialogue is here. It's just like it's straight like laugh out loud funny. Like between like this and like Beau's Afraid, which is also another highly provocative film, which I guess I should kind of preference for by saying this. Like if you thought Beau's Afraid was like too much for you, Poor Things is probably going to be on that same level. Like, cause it's on that same weird level where you kind of have to be along for the ride to accept the weirdness, to, you know, to just kind of like go with the bizarre flow that happens here. And if you're willing to, I will say that I like Poor Things a little bit more than Beau's Afraid. But for what the film sets out to do, it is just, I couldn't stop thinking about this film, and it's the funniest goddamn film that I've seen all year. And also like, you know, for like a film landscape where it feels like we don't have as many films that are erotic, this film just dives into the deep end. Like I was thinking like the most like daring sexual film I'd see this year would probably be like Infinity Pool from Cronenberg, and then no, here comes Yorgos Lanthimos, who's kind of like, you know, hold my beer. I'm gonna make the weirdest, wildest film that you'll see all year, and he does. So, in case it needed to be stated again, this is my favorite Lanthimos film. This is the funniest film of the year, the horniest film of the year. It is so much fun, and I cannot wait to see it again. So that was Poor Things, which will be in theaters on, I believe, December 8th is when it will finally be hitting theaters. So mark your calendars. Very, very early review, I know, but but I couldn't wait. I had to talk about it immediately. I love the hell out of that film. And I also need to stress that because like I saw like Poor Things and The Marvels back to back, and like these are both films that are trying to be weird, and I know this is an unfair comparison. I'm aware of this, but like the weirdness in Poor Things was like a bountiful Thanksgiving feast. Just all the trimmings, everything that I wanted, everything that I could gorge myself on. And The Marvels, in terms of its weirdness, was just kind of like microwave Tupperware leftovers, you know? I even wrote that in my review, so. And I know it's unfair. I know that, you know, Poor Things is Yorgos Lanthimos' film, and, you know, he has a lot of leeway, and The Marvels is, you know, a Marvel Cinematic Universe film, and I know that director Nia DaCosta is not going to be able to do as much as he wanted to. That's specifically why I didn't bring up her name during the review, because she is a good director, and I don't want anyone to come after her. It's like, oh, she made the worst Marvel films. Like, no, she's done good work before. Like, I liked Candyman. Like, I don't feel it's as great as the original, but it gets Candyman right. So yeah, it's unfortunate. That's often why, like, I don't know if anyone notices, but whenever I talk negatively about a film, I tend not to bring up the director. You'll notice that when I reviewed The Marvels, I didn't talk about Nia DaCosta, and when I reviewed Poor Things, I talked a lot about Yorgos Lanthimos, because I applaud their work. Because it's no fun if I just, you know, a capable director who makes a big budget blockbuster and it doesn't fire correctly. I don't want to rag on them, you know? Because chances are, like, it's like Nia DaCosta's already working on another film right now. And I'm sure, like, you know, compared to the mess that was the Marvels, I'm sure that she'll do a amazing job in the next film, because I've liked her work on Candyman. So, all right, we'll review one last film. Gonna review Quiz Lady, currently playing on Hulu. Okay, let me get a little drink here. And 3, 2, 1. So, Quiz Lady is a comedy all about one woman who's obsessed over a trivia show and finally makes her dream come true of going on to that show. So the film it's kind of like a combination of a few familiar comedy elements. It's got the road trip element with some cute little asides. It's got the big the big showdown where you're kind of rooting for the character. It's got, a bit of a criminal angle where, the mafia is involved and, the character has to outsmart them. And oddly enough, all these combination of elements kind of work. And I think a lot of that goes to the performances of making these characters likable and lovable, where you want to see what happens with them. So the story centers around Anne, played by Awkwafina, who's obsessed with this this quiz show on television, which is pretty much Jeopardy. Like, it's hosted by Will Ferrell playing this host called Terry McTeer, and it's pretty much Jeopardy. They stage it in a similar way. Trebek kind of puts on, Will Ferrell kind of puts on like the Alex Trebek type of hosting deal, but more genuinely. Like, he's not like, I gotta stress this, it's not Will Ferrell doing Alex Trebek on Celebrity Jeopardy for Saturday Night Live. It's not like that level of insulting character. It's meant to be more genuine and heartfelt, which I think it works well for Will Ferrell. Mostly because, like, it's nice to see Will Ferrell in a role where he's kind of meant to be a little bit more wholesome and cheerful, and who's mostly kind of been like someone who Anne has looked up to all these years. So Anne has spent all her years kind of obsessing over this quiz show, but she leads a kind of boring life. Like, she works as an accountant, she... and she just has like a fear of, being with other people and would never dare go on this quiz show. That is until her sister Jenny, played by Sandra Oh, comes into the equation. And when some debts roll their way and Anne's dog gets kidnapped by the mob, she thinks that the only way to save her dog is, to find some money. And the only way to do that is to get on this quiz show and win that money. So it's basically just Anne being pushed into doing this competition. And I will say this. I like the fact that, there is a reason, a motivation for Anne to do this. But as the film goes on, they actually find an easy resolve where Anne doesn't need the money. And I found that kind of interesting, because at that point, it becomes less about her just, trying to save the day, and more about her trying to come to terms with, realizing her dream. And a lesser film might not have done that. A lesser film might have just been like, she's got to get the money, and once she gets the money, everything will be solved. But they actually found a surprisingly cute way to get around, that plot about her trying to save her dog, in an adorable way. And I thought, like, it was just gonna, like, the criminals are just gonna be like, these typical mafia guys, there's not gonna be much to them. But then they actually find some funny stuff to do with them, which I guess is kind of the best way to describe Quiz Lady. It's just like, it's a comedy that finds fun stuff to do with its premise. It finds funny asides, like, in particular, I love the little sequence where they have Tony Hale playing this hotel manager who kind of runs this kind of like Benjamin Franklin style establishment, which he dresses up as Benjamin Franklin and tries to be era specific despite the fact that he's running a hotel. So there's a lot of fun stuff with him there. There's also, you have Jason Schwartzman playing like kind of like the Ken Jennings type character who's supposed to be the nemesis for Anne, who you just want to see Anne beat easily just because he's so smarmy, which again, much like Will Ferrell in this role, Schwartzman is playing up to his strengths here. He's great at being that kind of like smarmy, cocky guy who's so self-assured of himself as an intellect that he makes the perfect antagonist. And then there's also a cute little subplot, which I don't know if this is much of a spoiler here, but this is one of this film features one of the final roles of Paul Rubens, and like, without giving too much away here, I think it's probably one of the sweetest ways that you could use Paul Reubens in a film, especially for one of his last films. So it was very, very charming, that the way that they brought that around. So yeah, you end up kind of like rooting for Anne in this story. Like the quiz show itself feels fairly believable. Like, they take a few liberties here. Like, it's not just like a standard Jeopardy type deal. There's also like a charades aspect that's kind of thrown in, which is more or less just there so that Anne and Jenny can have that moment where they connect. I actually kind of dug the chemistry between Anne and Jenny, where it feels like, I mean, it's a standard comedy setup. Anne's the straight man, and Jenny is kind of like the party animal who's just, she deals drugs, and she lives life a little bit looser, and she tries to fix things, but then just kind of ends up making them worse here and there. But they kind of make the characters more lovable and actually, more competent by the end of the film, that you're actually kind of rooting for Anne and Jenny to win this competition by the end, even though it does kind of fall back onto some corny elements. It's one of those films where, even though it has a very predictable and corny finale, it puts enough work into the characters, and their performances are so just genuinely lovable that, I'm fine with the corny ending, because at that point it feels earned. Just because, like, Awkwafina does a great job, Sandra Oh does a great job, and then you just have Will Ferrell there just providing that sweet, wholesome comedic backup, and it works. It's not like a great, I don't feel like it kind of like, it's like a great road trip comedy, or even like a like a comedy that tries to, like, have fun with, like, Jeopardy. It does have some spots where the jokes are kind of like, oh, this is not like, it's not laugh out loud funny. It's like kind of like smile worthy. But every now and then there are moments where I was genuinely kind of like laughing out loud at this, and I was very, very impressed by the heart in this film a lot, which is what you want for this type of film. It's supposed to be kind of like a road trip bonding film merged with this kind of like quiz show competition and trying to prove yourself and kind of live up to your dreams. So on that level, Quiz Lady is actually, it's pretty fun. It's very cute, and it's adorable, and it's genuinely funny. So that's what more could I expect from a film like this, So Quiz Lady is currently streaming on Hulu. So there you go. There are our 3 films that have been reviewed this week. I also want to mention, too, because I'll probably do this the more we get into the season, I wanted to mention some other films that are just releasing this weekend. Well, actually, really only one film releasing this weekend. Expanding this weekend, actually. If you'd rather not see the Marvels based on my negative review, and you'd rather see something else besides that, might I recommend The Holdovers. I reviewed this film about 2 or 3 weeks ago. It's a film about Paul Giamatti playing a teacher who has to stay behind on Christmas break with the student, and he's also there with a grieving cook, and they just have fantastic chemistry. It's directed by Alexander Payne, the same guy behind Sideways. In fact, this is the first time that Payne has worked with Paul Giamatti in like 19 years, so that alone should be enough of a reason why you should check out this film. But yeah, it's definitely one of my favorite films of the year, and it's perfectly timed for the holiday season. So it's playing in select theaters right now, but this weekend it's going to be expanding into more theaters, and I hope that more people check it out. I've written my review, and hopefully more people take heed of it, because it really is one of my favorite films this year. In fact, if you want little preview, my favorite films this year: The Holdovers, Poor Things, Killers of a Flower Moon, and oddly enough, Beau's Afraid. There's a few others that I'm kind of, I'm kind of like sorting through my head. Do I want this on my top 10 or not? But those films are for sure going to be in my top 10 this year. So be sure to check out The Holdovers this weekend if you're not quite in the mood for the Marvels, or if you're staying in, go check it out. Go check out Quiz Lady on Hulu. All right. So let's do a quick recap of the films we reviewed on today's stream. We reviewed The Marvels, the latest film from the Marvel Cinematic Universe and the sequel to Captain Marvel. It doesn't quite have as much room for chemistry. It's a very crowded film that has some moments of sci-fi silliness, but it needs way more of those moments to make up for a rather substandard superhero story, which it sadly doesn't. I also reviewed Yorgos Lanthimos' Poor Things, a super funny and super horny Yorgos Lanthimos film that is basically like the Frankenstein story, but what if Frankenstein had a lot of sex and understood a lot more of how weird and bizarre the world is while trying to make sense of it all. It is easily one of my favorite films of the year. It's coming out in theaters on December 8th. Go check it out when you get the chance. And I also reviewed Quiz Lady, a fairly funny comedy starring Awkwafina and Sandra Oh, in which they do have great chemistry and just a very sweet and earnest nature to wanting to win on a game show. So of the three I mentioned, I would definitely check out Poor Things when you can, but it's not out in theaters right now. So in terms of films in theaters right now, I'd say go see The Holdovers. It's expanding this weekend. Don't miss it. It's the perfect holiday film. But if you're going to be inside, if you're not going to go out to the theater, go check out Quiz Lady on Hulu. It's worth it. Alright, so that should do it for this stream. I will be back in 2 weeks, just before Thanksgiving, to review some new films. What will we be reviewing? Oh, we got a lot of films we're going to be reviewing. We're going to be reviewing Disney's new animated film, Wish, which is fulfilling the Disney tradition of a Disney animated studio film coming out on Thanksgiving. I'll also try to review Thanksgiving, the new Eli Roth horror slasher film, based on the trailer he made for Grindhouse. And I will also be reviewing Ridley Scott's new historical epic, Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix. So, be sure to stop on by for that. And those will all be pretty much all those will be early reviews, except for Thanksgiving. Thanksgiving will be released just before Thanksgiving, obviously. But yeah, if you'd like to see the early review of Wish, and I believe... I think Napoleon's coming out a little bit after that. It might be expanding, but yeah, I'll cover that. But if you want to keep up with all the latest movie reviews, you can check out my written reviews over on movieswithmark.com, as well as filminquiry.com and twincitiesgeek.com. Also be sure to like and subscribe to this video, particularly because I'll have more movie reviews that come out this year, and we've got a lot coming up, so there's a lot to keep up on. And I want to stress this too. I'm going to try to cover everything. I try to do this as much as I can. I try to cover everything I can. I try to cover big films and small films. And also, I try to make sure to cover every film for the upcoming, award season. So that I've seen everything. So I'm not going to be one of those YouTubers who just are like, oh, I've never heard of this film and never heard of that film. I didn't see all that. No. I want to try to see everything. And I want to be genuine about it. So yeah, be sure to stay tuned on this channel. I'm going to try to review bigger and smaller films as they come on in award season here. And yeah, sure check out all my written reviews. In fact, you go to movieswithmark.com right now, you can check out my written review for Captain Marvel. And if you go over to filminquiry.com, you can check out my review for The Holdovers. So yeah, lots of good stuff coming up. So I will catch you all next time. Have a good one, everybody.